And we know that Mayor Valérie Plante mentioned during the pandemic that they had the number of homeless people had doubled in the city, and it was a huge problem. But I'd like to go back to the new oath. Allegiance to the Queen, well, that's a problem with us. And it talks about the Constitution. Now, I know that my colleague likes history, but the Constitution is something we didn't sign in Quebec. Now, suddenly, this appears in the citizenship oath.
For Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Madam Speaker, j'ai une solution.
I have a solution for him, Madam Speaker. You just have to sign the Constitution. It won't be a problem for you. But I'm joking, of course. It is true that what we're hearing from the government are words, 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 and there's no action. He's given some good examples. I work on the Foreign Affairs Committee. The government says one thing, but we're not seeing them do anything.
A number of issues in the oath. He's not necessarily enthusiastic about the reference to the Queen or the Constitution. I think that the general spirit of this is the application of Recommendation 94, and it is noteworthy that the reference to the Constitution does not appear in Section 94. That said, I mean, this is an issue that I'm sure members will raise at committee. The question for us at second reading is the spirit of the legislation at this stage. Thanks.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just wanted to correct some facts from my honourable colleague's speech, just to let him know that Bill C-262 was studied in committee. There was 71 witnesses and only one mentioned veto. So when he talks about the hysteria of actually ensuring that Indigenous peoples minimum human rights, basic human rights are recognized in this country by adopting and implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I'm wondering why the Conservatives continue to base their opinion on evidence that is not factual, in fact, and this has been affirmed by the legal community, and why he feels that providing Indigenous peoples with respect of minimum human rights, something that's afforded to other Canadians, is going to result in the sky falling. And this whole boogeyman coming out of the closet when it comes to ensuring that Indigenous people have the same rights as all other Canadians, I'm wondering why he violently and his party violently fights against that, and if they plan once again to vote in bloc against the human rights of Indigenous peoples in this country.
Honourable member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. With all due respect to my colleague, I'm not sure if her characterization of us being hysterical about this or of us violently opposing the legislation is quite on point. I would just say simply that I disagree with the former Bill C-262 insofar as I don't think it is an effective mechanism for upholding, yes, aspirations that we all have, but the question isn't just one of recognition, it's also a question of what the practical implications of the bill will be. And I think we need to have legislation that recognizes rights and is clear about giving Indigenous communities the opportunity to develop their own resources, because we don't want a situation where Indigenous communities are prevented from developing their own resources and prospering by the sentiments of minorities within the larger community. There has to be a process of meaningful consultation, and there has to be a result and an opportunity to develop in cases where it has the support of the majority.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and to my honourable colleague for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan. I hope you'll forgive me for picking up on one aspect of this notion that the Liberals will forever blame Stephen Harper for everything. I certainly share a lot of sympathies with his point of view. But we did debate in this place, and I know it's close to the heart of my friend from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, the egregious conduct of the People's Republic of China in relation to human rights, their corporations acting here in Canada. And I just want to point out and ask for his comments. The Canada-China Foreign Investment protection agreement was not only negotiated by Stephen Harper and brought into being and ratified through cabinet, through order in council, it binds this country legally for 31 years. It's rather hard to get out of it or treat it as something in the past when it bound us for such a very long time. And I'm wondering if he would agree with me that it's past time to have a full review of what we're obligated to and how our hands are tied as a result of this Canada-China FIPA.
Member for Sherwood Park for Saskatchewan.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question. Certainly, the relationship between Canada and the PRC is a subject of great interest. I would be forgiven for perhaps not having my notes on that specific topic in front of me as we're debating Bill C-8 dealing with the citizenship oath and Indigenous peoples. I mean, I understand the intention certainly that framed the agreement. It was designed to try to provide as much protection for investors, for Canadian investors that were operating in China. Obviously, it's a very difficult environment for Canadian investors, and I think it's also fair to acknowledge how even circumstances have changed around that relationship over the last 5 or 6 years, that maybe there were expectations of the trajectory of that relationship that existed 10 or 15 years ago that have just not come to fruition in accordance with those expectations. But maybe at some point on a Green Party Opposition Day, we'll have an opportunity to debate this in greater depth, and I will be fully prepared to give a more detailed response at that time.
Debate, the honourable member for Surrey Newton, and I will let him know right away that the questions will come after the period for oral questions.
As a Canadian, I'm a sucker for a good immigration story, and yeah, this guy's a liberal. Leave your comments down below. It's a good immigration story. He even gets all teary-eyed. Never knew much about this mister. Look into him. Again, comments below. Check it out.
And I think it's also fair to acknowledge how even circumstances have changed around that relationship over the last 5 or 6 years, that maybe there were expectations of the trajectory of that relationship that existed 10 or 15 years ago that have just not come to fruition in accordance with those expectations. But maybe at some point on a Green Party Opposition Day, we'll have an opportunity to debate this in greater depth, and I will be fully prepared to give a more detailed response at that time.
Debate, the honourable member for Surrey Newton, and I will let him know right away that the questions will come after the period for oral questions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the privilege to share my time today with my colleague from Oakville, North Burlington. I can't begin this speech without first acknowledging that the House of Commons is situated on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation. The oath of citizenship is very important to me as an immigrant to this country. The day that I was able to recite it in front of the citizenship judge was the day that I had truly arrived in this country. It is a moment in time that I will never forget. It was 1987, and I was an engineer student at the University of Calgary. For many years, Madam Speaker, both before and after I arrived here from India, Canada represented two things for me and the dreams that I had for my future: equality for all and opportunity for all. Madam Speaker, even without a firm grasp of English and very little financial resources, I knew that if I worked hard and embraced everything my new country has to offer me, I would succeed. And so in the weeks leading up to my citizenship ceremony, I recited the oath tirelessly. I worked on absorbing every word to memory. I practiced my pronunciation with diligence so that I could show the respect I felt towards such a monumental point in my life. But most importantly, Madam Speaker, I took the time to put into context what it meant to commit to fulfilling my duties as a Canadian citizen. I read as much as I could to educate myself about the history of Canada. I also read the Charter of Rights and Freedoms so that I could fully appreciate the values that united citizens of all backgrounds together. And most importantly, I spoke to people. I found out what it meant to be Canadian through the voices of friends and colleagues that I had met over the years. Madam Speaker, I'm sharing my own personal experience because ultimately the entire process behind our oath of citizenship boils down to values. These are the tenets that we as Canadians want to share with those seeking citizenship, and also fundamental pillars have now new Canadians will embark on their new life here in Canada. This is why Bill C-8 is so critically important. It is about reaffirming a reconciliation framework that shows respect and deference to the Aboriginal and treaty rights of the First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. Madam Speaker, the Canadian story begins with Indigenous peoples' heritage in Canada. And Madam Speaker, as part of Government of Canada's ongoing and ever-evolving commitment to a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Indigenous peoples, we must enact recognition of rights, respects, cooperation, and partnership in action. It is a process that is a multifaceted. This is why our Prime Minister has committed to national Indigenous organizations and that he would meet with them annually in order to sustain and advance initiatives that continue to grow shared priorities and progress. It is why every piece of legislation that this government advances is crafted with a lens of reconciliation and respect. And it is why at the moment of being granted citizenship, we are proposing revised text of oath to contain wording that reflects broad range of rights held by diverse Indigenous people. This is a difficult time for Canadians and for the entire world. Throughout the global pandemic, the government has focused on supporting Indigenous communities, working to control the spread of COVID-19 and keeping everybody safe. That is something the government will continue to do so as we walk the shared path of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and remain focused on implementing the commitments made in 2019. Racism has not stopped during this pandemic. If anything, it has gotten worse. The government is committed to addressing racism in a way that is informed by experience of racialized communities and the Indigenous people. This is hard work, not just for the Parliament, but for all Canadians. Renewing the relationship with Indigenous peoples must be based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Our laws and policies must foster cooperation with Indigenous peoples and reflect on how we can work to protect Indigenous languages, traditions, and institutions. Madam Speaker, this government continues to advance the belief that Canada's diversity is among its greatest strengths. We are a united country because of, not in spite of, our differences. At the same time, we remain focused on an inclusive society that is bound by a set of shared values. The citizenship oath is much more than a passage of words. It represents a deep appreciation for our open, free, democratic, and diverse Canada. We as a government believe strongly that the heart of that appreciation and understanding of Indigenous peoples, their history, and their rights, Bill C-8 Amendment is intended to contribute to reconciliation with Indigenous people. In closing, Madam Speaker, I just want to once again convey the importance that my citizenship ceremony and the oath that I recited has in my life. I was given a framework for my dreams, and the way in which in which I could fully embody becoming Canadian. Today's proposed change in language continues that process for every new Canadian from this point forwards. Indigenous peoples are at the heart of Canada's history, its identity, and in need its future. And this legislation will help to continue building trust through stronger, more collaborative and respectful relationship with Indigenous peoples across Canada. I want to thank you, Madam Speaker, and the House for the opportunity to speak today on this important matter. Sorry, I got a little emotional, Madam Speaker. Thank you again.
Questions and comments. Just one short question before we move to statements by members. The Honourable Member for Davenport.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the Honourable Member for his absolutely moving and beautiful speech in support of C-8. And so I have a very simple question for him. You know, he spoke passionately about the importance of including the Aboriginal peoples of Canada treaty rights in our oath. But I wonder whether he feels it's just one step in many steps in terms of recognizing Aboriginal treaty rights in our nation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're fast. Okay, that next time. They have to.
Honourable Member, you know, it's totally true. This is a one step moving forward. Truth and reconciliation has many different aspects, and I know that ministers are working very closely with Indigenous leaders across the country to ensure the access to either clean water, good health, and all other issues that they are facing are also taken care of.
Honourable Member will have 4 minutes for further questions after the time allocated for oral questions. Déclaration des députés.
Statements by members.
Members, the Honourable Member for Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. The Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Speaker, in recognizing the stark and unusual period we've been facing since March of this year, I'd like to pay tribute to the incredible efforts of the people in my riding who have stepped up to help our community in remarkable ways, supporting local charities, shopping local, adapting their small businesses literally on a dime to help deliver much-needed services and products safely.